Data obtained from the National Universities Commission reveals that a total of 33 private universities were approved by the regime of President Muhammadu Buhari within 16 months. The period under review is January 2021 and April 2022. And according to reports, while 21 of the private universities were approved in 2021, 12 were approved during the present strike by the Academic Staff Union of Universities. And prior to the establishment of the 33 universities, the total number of universities in Nigeria stood at 186, comprising 49 federal universities, 59 state universities, and 78 private universities.
And joining us to discuss this development is the Rice News analyst, Dr. Sam Amadi. Dr. Amadi, thank you so much for being here. And of course, when you look at this data as reeled out now in terms of the number of higher institutions we have in the country, private universities has doubled the number of federal institutions. And one wonders, you know, for countries such as Nigeria, do you think education is prioritized as much, is given the much needed attention that it does, not just by the federal government, we're talking in generality now?
Well, some people would think that maybe we have too many state universities or federal universities. Some people say each state has a federal university at the minimum, if you look at that number, and has a state university. Some have two, okay? But if you compare with India, a country that's comparable to us in terms of its, you know, diversity, probably we still need more and more universities. So, for example, in India, you could have, by some account, up to 500 or 5,000 schools and colleges. Some of them are mono universities, some are maybe music or some other things. Now, the key thing is that people argue that you need to have universities more like you know, liberalized, so that small, good, quality, no quality. Like in India, almost every cab driver is a graduate of a particular school. It could be all kinds of schools. A degree holder. Of all varieties. But of course, you have the top schools, you know, the Indian Institute of Technology and others that are better funded, much more, you know, excellent centers of excellence, where the society expect to have their best next generation technologies, policymakers, etc. So one can argue that, look, maybe you should have a proliferation of private schools. If you go to Abuja, if you go to Nasarawa, for example, now you see about 3, 4, 5 private universities that sprung up in the last maybe 2, 3 years. We'll talk about Kokasia, you see Ave Maria on that sketch, you see several of those schools, okay? Now, focus on funding at 3 levels. One is at, you know, improving university education. One is probably should have more with the Nigerian population and the way it's expected to grow in the future. You should have more universities, because if you look at JAMB, which with a lot of people left out of admission, if you take the model of India, where university education is like now basic, everybody acquires it at whatever, no matter the quality, then people can argue that you need more private, and that's why private universities are springing up. The second issue is that the failure of the public university system, not just in terms of poor quality, but in terms of even being in school. So most parents, as a university teacher myself, they come to me and say, please, is there any private school? So they're shopping for private schools. Some are basically dignified secondary school. So they will overlook places like Unilag, UI, Elori that are better. Why are they doing that? Because they think that those schools, apart from the fact that they are unstable, you can't be sure you're going to graduate in the next, if it's a course of 4 years, you can't be sure you graduate in 6, 7 years. But other driving force is that quick admission. Those schools through JAMB might be difficult. So we're going to see the push factor, the demand for university placement. Right. Because Nigeria is a certificate conscious society. That push factor means that more people are, as we're talking now, NUC is processing a lot of those applications.
Well,
so basically we'll come back to
the point you're making right now. At the end of the day, if you look at our population, it depends on who
and
you're
the demand
looking at,
for education,
and the demand for education. We need these private institutions. But for someone like me, I'm a product of the public school, from my nursery to the primary to the tertiary institution. Are we saying that we're giving up on, you know, federal institutions, should we now just focus on the private, especially for a country like Nigeria, where we're seeing a decline in per capita income of families?
Well, people can argue that from an economic perspective, federal government should focus more on primary and secondary school, which is what guarantees the basic level of literacy education I need. So the basic education policy is now what we call 9 years. Okay, you do 6 years plus junior secondary, which ought to be basic and compulsory. So people can argue, why should federal government be investing in building universities when they don't even have quality primary, secondary education? Now, non-profits, business should be the ones investing in university education for two reasons. The first is that at that level, you are going to focus more on a lot of research and quality. So the businesses have incentive to invest. They're going to make money commercially viable. Non-profits, if you go, for example, developed countries like the US, private universities, what they call private university, basically universities, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, they are all not government. They are not government owned. They are individuals or institutions or agencies, some of them churches and missionaries. So nothing wrong in government allowing private sector to go, but the question we want to ask is quality. Do we have a structure that enables, so that we verify? Some of the universities are not, the infrastructure is problematic. The curriculum, the teaching, and even the quality of management. So NUC seemed to take, I was part of the promoters of one of these schools, and NUC seemed to take a view that they want to minimize on physical infrastructure and focus more, prioritize on curriculum and faculty. So they argue that most of these professors who are retired but not tired could be used to teach because of their experience. And I agree with them, because if you go to, when I was a research fellow in the US University, the professors are 90 years, emeritus, they are all attending to research and counseling. There are many professors in Nigeria who have been retired at 70, 75, who are actually, if you like, at the peak from science of brilliance and intellectuality. So the private universities can use them. So I will be thinking more of the quality of curriculum development, faculty, and less on structure. And that's what NUC is doing. It makes sense. But the question we want to ask ourselves is, look, should we now de-emphasize public universities? No. Should we now allow this flourishing of, some people say, mushrooming of private universities because public universities are closed? Because so parents are now shopping for where the children can go to school. Oftentimes, there's no quality. I mean, think a school like close by University of Abuja, for example, is far better in quality. I taught at a private university. But in terms of faculty development, professors, human resources, Abuja, even though it's not top layer in terms of Unilag or IFE or UNN or even University of Ilori in terms of NUC ranking. Yeah, but Abuja is still far better than, I can tell you,
the number of the
private universities that are charging millions. But the problem is the lack of stability and the lack of a commercial private sector oriented leadership. So these vice chancellors need to compete. And before they can do that, federal government should allow schools to be in session. Otherwise, everybody will just flood.
I love the words you've used, compete, I mean, which is, germane here. How competitive really are Nigerian universities when you look at most of the instruction is basically theoretical? Well, how many, technical universities do we really have, and what are they bringing
to the table?
Onto the table where it concerns developmental issues?
Absolutely, great question. I mean, if you look at someone like Chuka Okonjo, the father of Professor of Ngozi Okonjo, he's an expert, worked in Ghana, UN. He wrote a book and argued on changing Nigerian education policy. You see, it should be developmental oriented. And people have argued, if you look at developed countries in the world, one of the key things about development is that you must have a functional education that creates development at a personal level. Like Base says, learn to live. People must be trained to be able, so that the education can help them live in a complex world. Secondly, the education should help them working together to create development and innovation. So the question is not just saying Federal University of Technology or saying Polytechnic here or College of Technology. Is that, are you consciously networking those institutions to the business and development centers? Right. So as a collaboration. Are you also using funding, granting aid to stimulate innovation? So take, for example, if every Minister of Education gives the same grant to all federal universities, whether you are researching or not, whether you have a library or not, so some of them even deliberately employ people who have no certification, no qualification, because they are from their
Just
zone.
so.
You
To
are
administer the grant.
You are disincentivizing education for development. So I think it's policy failure. You have to tie support to a strategic outcome the university produces. So we can't be struggling for development and we have universities that claim to have faculties of engineering, faculties of medicine, faculties of neurology.
And they are not contributing
And
anything to Innocent or to Dangote's Pojo in Kaduna.
So it's failure.
Yeah.
You need to tell of failure so that you use granting aid to support them. If you give everybody the same thing, what are you producing? Look, a typical center in the US, for example, if you see the grant proposal writing, they hire people purposely to get proposal, to get support from National Institute of Health. So sometimes big schools like Harvard will miss out of proposal. Small schools are centers of excellence in different things, in biology.
They find their strengths and prioritize that.
And that will fund the rest of their program. So they use a niche project. Develop expertise, compete. So if you see the standard requirement to even get those grants. But in Nigeria, budget is released, you share to schools. You don't even ask whether they have a structure that enable them to use those funds well. You don't even ask what is this university producing at the end of the day. So even the quality of the graduates.
What research are they
nothing.
Even doing?
They're not contributing to the community, this
Right.
corporate. So that gown and town handshake is not happening because we set up universities like we set up the ministries with no policy purpose.
Some of those schools now are even getting shut down. Some of them are even getting shut down.
You're not even in school for 8 months, so how are you going to even do research?
Dr. Sam Amadi, we have to find a balance at the end of the day because a country or a nation without quality education
and
is a country in trouble already. Dr. Sam Amadi, Arise News analyst, thank you for being here. Well, let's head for this quick break now. When we return, there will be more stories for you here on Newsnight.